These SAM Talks were developed to showcase Asian and Asian American talent, to highlight their amazing achievements and impact. And we are ready now to welcome our inaugural speaker, the most decorated U.S. Winter Olympian, a New York Times bestseller, a passionate advocate for mental health and human performance, Dancing with the Stars champion. Please welcome Apolo Ohno and our chair, Gary Rieschel.
Good evening. I have to say, the last time, or the first time we did this when we launched Asia Society Seattle, we had a very nice panel with Bill Gates and Kevin Rudd, Danny Russell, myself, Ling Ling Wei. This is a lot more fun. You know, there's only so much you can listen to about AI and technology, and then you look at someone who lived on the nice edge of a skate at 25 miles an hour for the better part of his life. It's like, okay, that person's more interesting to have a conversation with. So tonight it's a real delight, real pleasure and honor for me to have a conversation with Apolo and later with Taylor Swanson. So you were born in Seattle, or you were raised in Seattle?
I was raised in Seattle. My dad, many of you are from Seattle, you live here. My dad still has the same shop on near 4th and Bell in Belltown, his hair salon. What has it been, like 45 years? I think I don't know where my dad's sitting. I think 45 years he's had the same place running and going there all the time. So, yeah, I grew up here, but I had moved away from home when I decided to be a part of the Olympic Training Center program that was in Lake Placid, New York, which is an entire different story. But yeah, this place has been very, very good to me.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have you back. One of the things that we were talking about backstage, and then we were doing a briefing call, is how you think about, since we're in the Seattle Asian Art Museum, how you think about art and sport. What Apolo has done, obviously, has been phenomenal. The first time I ever watched him perform was in 2002 in Salt Lake. I've never been so nervous watching a sporting event as I was watching short track speed skating, because they hit each other. They slide off the thing, they're flying. I mean, it's like watching, there's that famous horse race, the Palio in Siena, where the horses run into each other and they fly, everything's flying up in the air, the jockeys, and that's the same thing with short track. You're like, wow. I mean, it was just tense just watching it. Why did you choose short track? What in your personality led you to that?
I don't know if I chose short track per se. Yeah, I wanted to play traditional stick and ball sports. I want to play baseball, basketball, football, track and field. I originally wanted to be a boxer. My dad said that that's probably not a good idea. I'm not like the tallest of humans, so basketball was not, probably my second choice. And then when he said no to football, I realized like there was only a few select sports that he wanted me to participate in, and one of them was swimming. I excelled in swimming, and then we had seen the Olympic Games, the Winter Olympic Games, together on television, and I fell in love with the sport. Growing up here, it rains a lot, so back in my day on Friday and Saturday nights, we would go to the local roller skating rink, and he would drop me off at this local roller skating rink, and I would skate for hours and hours with my friends, and then he would pick me up. It was like the safe place for me to be, or so he thought. Yeah, and then I think I naturally had a propensity for sport. My father, being a Japanese immigrant who came to this country and just worked his butt off, I think that his individual work ethic he just naturally was trying to ingrain that within me. And, the one thing that was different maybe in my household versus others, because I grew up in a single parent household and my dad raised me my entire life, was there was this constant kind of conversation around anything that you desire or you want to do is possible. It's not guaranteed that you'll receive the outcome that you desire, but having that idea set that the potential within you is almost limitless. I mean, that started as young as I can actually remember. And that was in academics, that was in, he was like forced me to go do like the Northwest Boys Choir. That was like a very traumatic experience. I was that kid singing outside your door. That was me. It's ridiculous. And he pushed me in everything that I did, and I didn't understand at the time about why my dad was just so intense. They call it Tiger Mom or Tiger Dad. And I'll tell you a story, just like background and context. So, growing up here. Is it better? Yeah. All right. You're good with that. Okay. Is this better? Can you hear me? Sorry. Okay. So, I was a roller skater in Washington State, and my dad wanted me to go to the national championships, like in roller skating. When you're young and without a phone, this all seemed like this really big deal. And I remember that my dad was working 12 hours a day. He didn't have time to take me to the kind of local roller skating rink to train and practice with the local club. And so what he would do instead, mind you, I'm like 12 years old, he would wake me up at like 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. And then before work, he would drive me to these empty school and empty church parking lots where there's no cars. And he would turn the lights on in this old car that he had. And he had like a stopwatch and his little clipboard. And he would just he taped a miner's light to my helmet. And he would just like make me skate around like in circles. So, I don't think that did anything other than like severe sleep issues. But what it did do is I think at a very early stage, it ingrained this idea of work ethic and dedication and sacrifice and discipline that, I didn't really know the power of that until literally 10 years later, where I relied upon that early teaching, that early insight about how I can draw from those experiences where sometimes when you really want something really bad, it kind of goes against the laws of sports science or what people say you should or shouldn't do, because the human desire and spirit is unmatchable. It's almost uncontainable and it's almost unmeasurable in certain aspects. And I was lucky to have that experience.
Yeah, it's interesting that you drew back on that because it wasn't always a smooth path. It's not like you went to high school, you were the ideal student in high school, and then the ideal...
What do you mean?
Yeah, I can read. And I talked to your dad for an hour before you got here. But no, it seemed as though you obviously had the physical talent, and you obviously had the mental discipline from a young age, but something was missing for a while. So you started, you stopped, you didn't make Nagano, the Olympic team. Talk about that struggle. Talk about what it is that was going through your mind at the time. Because just before we came out, we were talking about, I asked Apolo, so now there's more support available for adolescents, young adults with mental health. There wasn't back when, well, certainly at my age and Apolo's age, we didn't really talk about it. You didn't really admit it. But is it harder now because of social media and all the different lights that get shown on individuals and all the comparison and things? Is it actually harder now even with the support? And so kind of that conversation, but also your struggles and what was going on, because you had all the tools, but something wasn't quite right.
I don't know if I've ever been quite right, to be completely honest with you, but at the age of 14, I had a natural talent for the sport that only typically gets you so far in anything that you do. And it may get you to the start line, it may give you the first couple of medals or successes in career, but at some point, there's a leveling up if you really want to extend beyond which is what your not raw natural talent is. And so my raw natural talent propelled me to being number one in the United States, not in my age group, but amongst everyone. So, I was on the team with people who were 35 years old, right? And I was technically the captain, and I still had braces. It was like very strange and awkward. And then the following year was the Olympic year when I was 15 years old, and I effectively threw it away, right? I had not listened to a bunch of coaches. I had joined a national training program where I didn't understand, the resistance training and rest and recovery and just the complexities of becoming a professional athlete. I was still a kid. But most importantly, this thing here, the space between my own 2 ears was just turned off. I didn't want it. I was afraid of failure. And so I don't know how many of you have ever suffered from this, but when you have sometimes such a deep, paralyzing fear of failure, there's this kind of self-saboteur that exists inside the spirit where you maybe subconsciously throw, monkey wrenches in your way, or your brick is on the brake while you pedal to the metal on the gas pedal. And that sometimes is, you know, it takes a while for you to realize that there's nothing wrong with you. You just have to remove this brick from the break and allow yourself to, life's hard enough, right? Short track speed skating is a very volatile sport. Anything can happen. You run the same race 4 different times. You probably get 4 different winners. I don't need to place more challenges there, but I was afraid of showing up as my best self and that being not good enough. And I was afraid of that. And I didn't realize that and recognize that at that point, but my dad did. And so what he did, being the single parent, you know, tough love father that he was, is he kind of took me to this very desolate, isolated place, and he dropped me off for like 9 days, where he said, look, I saw you throw away this incredible Olympic opportunity, and I don't know what to do with you, but you have to figure out for yourself. So at the age of 15, I had to come up, you know, with this idea of like, do I want to go back to academics full time and forget about this Olympic path? Do I want to pursue the Olympic path one more time? And if I do I have what it takes to go and actually make an Olympic team? And I didn't know the answer to that second part. And so there was a lot of, you know, internal struggle and wrestling and fork in the road conversations that I had when I was all alone in this cabin, which is 3.5 hours from here in Mo Clips. It's, you know, Copalis Beach area.
He really let you off in the wilderness.
No, he dropped me off at the cabin. I had like food and stuff, but like there was.
I was going to ask.
It's not like Lost, you know. I'm like completely naked. I'm just like, you know, trying to find my way. I mean, I thought I was. There was no phone, no cell phone. There was like no video games. There was a payphone down the street. I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful place. But I always joke, I'm like, this is you get sent here if you're part of the witness protection program. It's the only reason. Back then, that's what I thought. So, but so that was what happened. I made the decision. I had told him that I wanted to continue to speed skate and give it my all. And I promised myself, right? Sometimes we all have promises to ourselves that we either listen or sometimes we don't. But there are those certain promises that somehow cut a little bit deeper. And this one seemingly cut very deep. And it was burned into my soul, where I felt like there was just going to be this effort and this obsession around the sport. And it just clicked, right? Sometimes you can't force these things. And to talking about, you know, what athletes have to go through today, on one side, athletes have this incredible tool of social media. So they can market themselves, they can interact with people, they can grow an audience. You don't even have to be a great athlete, and you can go and have an incredible career because you've become this influencer and personality online. On the flip side, if you don't like that, that does become a distraction. And so it's fascinating, right? Like in the era that we grew up in and competed in, it was really simple. Like when we trained and competed, that's all that we did. It was just like blinders on, day in and day out. It was a very simplistic, routine, repetitious life. And when, you know, all of these phones and new tech started getting introduced, we started to see. And when I go watch the athletes today, it's such a different experience. When they cool down, it's like after the workouts, they're just jogging and then they're stretching around in a circle. No one's talking to each other. Everyone's on their phone. And I remember I snapped a picture of that, and I saved this picture. I was like, wow, like this is so different than how we grew up. And now I'm becoming that old curmudgeon guy who's like, when we skated, it was uphill both corners, you know?
And the snow was up to here when we walked to school. When you think about one of the conversations that we had, and we'll have a little bit more of this with Taylor as well, the intersection of art and sport. And so you were drawing the analogies of the human body and the form and how perfect that form has to be the best in a sport. You have some idea, but for each body it's a little bit different. But there's just like a perfect timing, a perfect cadence, some balance that you find. How do you think that art relates to that kind of in your life? And then I had a follow-up question, which is, before a short track event, were you more nervous? Or before Dancing in the Stars, were you more nervous?
I was actually much more nervous for Dancing with the Stars. Yeah, I didn't know what the hell I was doing, right? Doing those funny shoes and those outfits. Well, look, to me, and obviously I'm biased, like sport is art to me. And I see whether it's gymnastics or swimming, you know, Michael Phelps and we both have had multiple similar sponsors. And so on one of these sponsorship, and there's a reason why I'm telling the story, one of these sponsorship outings, we were in New York City at Chelsea Pier. And it was a part of this commercial that we were filming. And we both had to swim in the water. And I got to swim with Michael Phelps. And I remember, I was in the water before he was, and I'm kind of, I consider myself a decent swimmer. He was like a Washington State champion. I had like a world record, Washington record for many years. And then he jumps in the pool, and it was unbelievable. And I'm, being an athlete, I can see specific types of biomechanics, angles, this comfortable fluidity that exists when someone gets into a flow state. If you're a basketball fan and you watch Steph Curry in the Olympics, like the final 2 minutes of that game in the men's, gold medal match, he was in this complete impossible zone that to him, actually, I bet you if you asked him, it was probably very easy. To us, we were just like, how can these things happen? And so when Michael jumped in the pool, I can still vividly remember this experience where he jumped into the pool and he just kind of floated like horizontally, and it seemed like an eternity. And he just like stayed there. And I was like, wow, he looks so much more comfortable in the water than he does on land. This is unbelievable. This man is a fish. And so, to me, there's so many similarities between art and motion and fluidity. Art and sport are kind of intertwined, and not all of art is like that, but it can be, right? There's this explosive movements, there's this, kind of fluid, beautiful, it just depends on how the sport's being captured, experienced viscerally, and everyone has their own experiences through sport. Sometimes it's choppy, sometimes it's inconsistent. And in speed skating specifically, there's this fine line between, for those of you who've never speed skated before, I'm assuming most of you did not, we skate on this piece of metal that's about 1.1 inches thick. 1.1 inches thick. Excuse me, 1.1 millimeters thick. And on this blade, it's 17 inches long, and we kind of carve around these corners at these impossible angles. And what's so unique is, your nose, knees, and toes have to be completely lined up to generate enough force and power into the ice. And it looks like we're pushing back, right? People always, like when they imitate speed skaters, look like you're pushing back. In our heads, we're actually trying to push forward. Because we're moving so fast, it actually looks like we're pushing back, even though we're trying to push forward with the skate. We're pushing with our heel. And, it's like small nuances like that I find to be so beautiful. And there is this fine line between not trying hard enough and just trying hard enough. And in that sweet spot, if you can find it, is this really, really amazing feeling of it just happens it's almost an automatic. When we were on the call together, I was talking about, and I'm obsessed with this topic now, flow state, mainly because, in the world that we live in with all these devices always constantly pinging us, the person who introduced me first to the world of sports psychology, mindfulness, meditation, in order to enhance my performance on the ice and through training, that conversation was with a guy named David Creswell. And I was 15 years old at the time. He went on to have this incredible career, now runs a high-performance lab at Carnegie Mellon, studying the capacity of the mind and its impact on stress, how we interact with different perceptions of challenges in our lives, and also how we can get into these, what we would call getting the zone or getting to the flow state. And so, when we were on our call together, we were in the flow state. When we're having conversations with like a loved one or a friend that we haven't seen in a long time, or you're just having an amazing bowl of noodles, whatever it might be, there are these moments where time, the dilation of time is in this, you can't tell how much time has passed. And artists experience this all the time. And when they're in the writers too, but when artists are experiencing these moments, it's almost like nothing else exists in the world. And so same thing in the Olympic space is we become so addicted because this feeling of, as a human being, everything revolves around time. Your whole life is around time. Okay, this event starts at this time. This is what's going on. But imagine for a second that you have a 40-second race that you've trained 12 years of your life for. And in that 40 seconds, the difference between winning first, getting the gold medal, having a conversation here on stage with you, or being in fourth place and not receiving a medal, that difference is like 2 finger snaps. 4 people just crossed the finish line after a decade plus of training and dedication and work that everyone goes through. And so there is this want and desire to be in this moment where the 40 seconds, how do I extend that to make it feel like it's almost an eternity, like it's a 4-minute race, even though it's only still 40 seconds. But perceptually, I've experienced those things. And so at the height of my career, there was times when I was in fourth place. And I can still vividly remember where I felt like I was the person controlling the pace of what was going on. And that's maniacal and probably untrue in certain aspects, but there's something there that I could see, and everyone seemed to telegraph their movements. I would know, oh, in one lap, this person's going to slip. In a lap and a half, I'm going to make a move on the outside, and then I'm going to pass on the inside. Even though there's no space, I'll somehow just slip in there. And your brain, your prefrontal cortex, everything seems to shut down, and people think that you're actually processing the information so much faster, and you are, but it's because all the other lights in your brain are turned off. And only the ones that you're concentrating on are actually lit up. And that's that beautiful state that I think that we go into. And that's why I love art. That's why, I get obsessed around really anyone who I see that is even a small child, like, young kids, when they're playing at a really young age, you almost can't interrupt them. They're just in this space, this beautiful space where they're completely focused and in tune, and time no longer exists for them. And that's the downside, I think, of this advent of technology and the constant being plugged into the matrix, so to speak, is that we are now challenged with not being able to get into those states as fast.
Yeah,
And
we're so interrupt driven. We're so interrupt driven. It's very hard to make, because you can't just jump in and out of what you're calling the flow state. There's a process through which you go in and you get into it, and then you don't want to leave it because it's addictive. How do you find that now in what you're doing now? How do you find that state where it can give you the same satisfaction that you had as an athlete or as a performer?
Well, today it's very different, right? I mean, I still work out, and I still love the experience of like pushing my body. I don't train anymore. I exercise, and it is challenging, right? Whether I'm analyzing a company or talking to founders, or I'm just trying to be creative. There's all these different, we're all faced with life, right? And life was always pulling unforeseen, unexpected situations and events, and you have to deal with these things. And when I was skating for the Olympics, I literally removed all distractions from my life. If it didn't make me stronger, help me recover faster, make me a better athlete, I basically said no to it. And I had a half my life at that time where I said no to everything. Everything else was a second priority. So it was actually very easy to get into the flow state then. I didn't get into it as frequently as I had liked. And today, there are moments where I do need the routine. And I think all of us, if there's anything that we can learn about some of the highest performers in all career sets, doesn't matter if they're in sports or not, is you will find a common thread of people who do two things specifically. Number one, they're extremely consistent with how often and how frequently and how much volume that they dedicate towards a thing that they're doing is, whether it's sport, whether it's art, they're constantly there. And two, there's this uninterrupted concentration that seems so laser-like, where I think that was one of my true strengths once I was able to train that in sport. But when I was a kid, I didn't have this. Like, I was all over the place. That's why it was hard to keep concentration, and I struggled at times. Teachers would always say I was interrupting the class, and I was just bored, right, in reality. And I needed to find something that drew me so I could hone in on this laser focus. And so, knowing what I know now about myself, everything about the sport of short track makes sense for me.
Makes sense, yeah. So one of the things also, 5 minutes. One of the things that also came up is the controversies when you're in short track. Almost every race in Salt Lake City, someone would raise a flag and there'd be some kind of protest, and someone would change position, et cetera, because it's such tight geometries with 4 to 6 bodies all trying to race through this tight area. And you had a couple controversies on medals that you won. And to the point where you were actually, I think, you were nervous about going to South Korea, because it was the South Korean team, and you'd had that controversy. But it seemed to resolve itself in a very interesting way, such that the teams were hugging each other. There was this whole medal of performance where I remember the two teams hugging each other. Briefly walk us through that path, what it was like to start with controversy, and then was it the sport? Was it the kind of the shared cultural heritage? What was it that Asian American, Korean, Japanese or what else was it that actually allowed you to just get everyone to get comfortable and kind of come out the back end of that?
I don't know if it was we became comfortable. I think they just beat me a couple of times. I mean, I don't usually do it. Revenge. The South Korean team was and still is exceptional. Their work ethic, their attention to detail. I mean, people don't know this, but I went as a part of the latter part of my career. I went to South Korea and I trained with one of the local national training program teams, which people don't normally do. And this was like a big, people were like raising their eyebrows because they were like, wow, you're going to reveal all your secrets. And the conversation that I had with my dad was, I have to know like who I'm really up against. And I didn't fully understand. I had South Korean coaches. We had trained together. I had tried to understand, to speak Korean, because the coaches would make these, hand signals and they would yell, and it was helpful to us to understand what they were communicating. I knew how to make Korean food. Like I became very obsessed with the culture, because this was my competitor, right? They were my biggest rival. And by living and training alongside these young kids is where I not only found the love for the sport again, but also I think there was a mutual respect where, I went there alone. Though I didn't go there with my dad, I didn't go there with any other teammates. It was just me. I went and I lived with this family, and luckily, this family, one of the father of this one son, he was a very famous movie star. He was a musician in South Korea. And maybe that's why no one said anything to me. But during the training programs, I remember we would show up at like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, and we would train. And before we trained, there was a younger group of athletes that were there before us. And they were training and doing these skating exercises that, to me, half of our national team, senior level, could not do with the same level of technical expertise. And that's when this like light bulb went off, and I was like, wow, like they're training. Talk about a rising tide lifts all boats. Like they just... There's this mentality where no one was complaining about the training. Everyone was collectively working together. And it was very serious every single morning. Like there was like some joking here and there, but the training was brutal. I remember the first day that I showed up, they broke 5 world records on the same day that I showed up during training. And I was just like, wow, this is incredible. So there was 2 things. There's a mutual respect for both the process in which, I trained very differently. And then I think that they also saw me as this kind of wild American who was very unpredictable, and they didn't know how to prepare against. But sport is sport, right? It's very different than anything else, and there's emotion involved, and it is unpredictable. But they made me so much better because of that rivalry.
It's probably fair to say though that the respect wouldn't have been there if you hadn't gone. Sometimes you need to go. We were having conversations today around a different organization, and they want everyone to come to the United States. Sometimes all the Americans have to do is show up somewhere else to actually have a really big impact, because it does show respect and kind of a mutual respect, if you will, if you take the right approach to it.
Yeah, especially in Asian culture, like saving face and showing face is very, very important. And sometimes the result is disregarded if you give all of yourself front facing. That means a lot, and I think at the core, and I think it does for all people, culturally insignificant. Like when you see someone show up as their best self and they give 100% of themselves, win, lose, or draw, there's a sense of like thank you for giving me the respect to show up as your best self.
Okay, so with that, we're going to ask Taylor Swanson to come out. So Taylor is a Paralympic athlete, and she holds for her classification, she holds the 100 meter and 200 meter American records right now. And she has a silver medal and a bronze medal from Paris. She was adopted from Korea. It's interesting, there's a Korean exhibit upstairs. We're having this conversation between Japan and Korea. It's kind of a nice juxtaposition with all of this. But her parents are here as well this evening, Brian and Stacy. And so, Brian, did I get that right or did I get that wrong? Let me see. Correct, okay. I can't read my own writing. So, and so it's nice that the parents are actually here. I think it's a reflection of how hard it is to be an Olympian, and then perhaps even harder to be a Paralympian. because before the Olympics, before the sport, there's a whole lot of other things you have to deal with. And so I'd like to welcome Taylor Swanson to the stage. And she brought some hardware. And you can tell they're new because they're not dinged up. So once the athletes start traveling, they're always asked, well, bring your medals. So by the time a couple of years go by, you'll look at it, it'll be scratched, it'll have a scrape on it, it'll have a big ding where someone dropped it on the floor. Yeah, so look at them now, they're in probably about as pristine a condition as they'll ever be. So basically, walk us through your journey to becoming a Paralympian. And I will caution you that maybe the 2-minute version and not the 20-minute version, only because I'm going to get flagged very quickly on time. And I want the two of you to have a conversation, because I'm not I'm not an Olympic athlete, and that was never one of my fantasies. A game-winning shot in a basketball game was kind of my fantasy. But so you guys have had a very unique journey, and so I'd like you to have some of the conversation between the two of you as well. So
yeah, so for me, Paralympics was not, I didn't know that I had a disability when I was a kid. I knew that I had a lot of difficulties in school and in sports, and for me, it was about trying to fit in with my peers, which was actually rather difficult. But after getting a knee injury, it my plan kind of shifted. And through that experience, after lots of medical appointments, I had a physical therapist that recommended that I might qualify for the para side of things. And so I met with Teresa Skinner and Parasport Spokane, and she was able to figure out that the symptoms that I had as a kid growing up and all of my difficulties were just part of having cerebral palsy, which she diagnosed. And then I came back to Seattle and saw a neurologist who confirmed it. And getting that answer was really important. It gave me clarity. It gave me answers that I didn't know I was looking for. So then I started pursuing parasport and what that looks like for me, and realizing that I finally had a group that I finally felt like I fit in, that I wasn't like an outsider trying to fit in. So it was really eye-opening, being able just to have a group that made sense.
I guess, and one thing that Apolo and I were talking about earlier, was the idea of art and sport. And we were talking a little bit before this session around that, and especially from your condition. From when you look at your, as a Paralympian, I was Googling this afternoon, and I say, well, I wonder how many artists and musicians have had different issues. And on about the 12th Google page, I realized that there were probably a lot more than I would actually ever really uncover. And so why don't you talk from your perspective? And I'd like the two of you to kind of like, you have art and athletics, and then you have the artists and the athletes. And so I'd like the two of you to chat a little bit about that.
Yeah, so from my perspective is that in para, there's this, nothing is in harmony. So that means that it's about adaptation. So the way that an able-bodied person might run 100 is very different than the way a para-athlete would. They have to adjust either with equipment or adjusting their body in a different way to be able to have that harmony, that to get to that finish line, and to be able just to just making minor adjustments that might not seem big at the time, but that allows them to be able to move in a way that will allow them to race or whatever sport that they're doing.
It's interesting. On our call, you remember we were talking about kind of replaying like specific races of being in flow.
Yeah.
And then you said something that I thought was really interesting about, you were like, well, a lot of times when it's in flow, one side of my body is just still not, it doesn't fire, it's not working.
Yeah.
So I think, I don't know, to me that's such a unique experience, because, you know, I would complain if I have 1% difference.
Yeah.
And you're saying that there's days or there's competitions and maybe there's months where it's completely like, it feels like it's a different part of your body.
Yeah, so for me, my right side is affected and I have limited feeling on my right side. So some days I will have really good days and I can run really fast times, but other days, like what happened in Paris when I found the 200, gives you an idea of just like some things are not, you can't control. And it's about finding that balance in that situation, making the best of it.
When you say, sorry, I just find it so interesting, because in short track, you know, we always say like it's a master class in stoicism.
Yeah.
Because, you know, things happen and, you know, you win, you lose, you go into Olympic Games, you train a lifetime,
Yeah.
and the race doesn't go exactly as you want it.
Yeah.
And so, like, I would love to know, like, what went through your mind after that event, and then, you know, the months after. How do you bounce back psychologically from something like that?
So in the 200 when I fell, it was obviously a hard situation to be in, but for me, it's like I just chalk it up as a bad day, like everyone has, and from there, it's about, okay, this happened, but I'm not going to let it impact the rest of my races, because I still had 2 more races to compete in, so I wanted to do my very best in those situations. And then for you, I know you mentioned sometimes things don't go the way you wanted them to, so like your mental state, how do you bounce back?
I think it's similar, you know. I had a bad habit where if a race didn't go my way and I was the favorite to win that race, you know, we would have 2 to 3 days in between races.
Yeah.
But those 2 to 3 days were like excruciating, because I would just replay the failure thousands and thousands of times over in my head. But every time I'd replay it is, oh, you should have done this and you should have done that. And what I know now, and what we know, you know, then too, was surrendering to a specific outcome is actually incredibly freeing. And the only way that you can begin anew is if you surrender to that outcome. It doesn't mean you surrender. The outcome and the result cannot be changed. You can use from that fire, motivation, grit, drive, determination. That can be extracted, but all of the result, all of the what if, those are just tools and lessons strategically to be placed for the next time. And then you have to wipe the slate. It's kind of like someone who builds this like beautiful piece of art in sand, and then they start all over again, right? And I think having that mentality, from what I've read, learning to kind of have that beginner's mind is actually the most powerful thing, because as we both know, our races in sport will not be the only times that we fail. It'll happen iterations upon iterations of times. And I think that what sport can teach us, and what it really taught me, was that this inner continuation of survival and learning, and the perception of what just happened is in here, no one else's. So whatever just happened can seem devastating or, you know, really horrific, or if we can just change the lens at which we are viewing optically of what we are seeing and experiencing, and it's hard, that changes everything. And if this is now, you know, and sometimes we don't know the answers. We don't know why this thing happened to us on this day or what happened. So that's at least how I try to look at things now.
Yeah, kind of like a short-term mindset of whatever happened, moving forward and not letting everything impact. Just focusing on ways you can improve instead of just looking back of what could I have done differently.
Yeah, there was like a couple of I used to play badminton with my strength and conditioning with the guy who taught me sports psychology, and he was a tennis player. He was a very good. He played at Colorado College, and he would just he would smoke me in badminton, And I used to get so pissed, right? I was like, this guy cannot be better than me. And then he would, being a sports psychologist, he would ask me questions. He would he would hit something and I would hit it into the net, and he would just say something like, what were you thinking in that last rally? And I was like, I'm thinking about throwing this racket over the net. That's what I'm thinking about, Dave. Just keep your mouth shut, And anyway, so what I'm saying is I just learned so much about these different experiences of how this thing can really be used as a positive tool and how it can't. So
I wanted to shift things. Just one last question from me, and then we'll go to the audience. So we talked about Paris, and we talked about just the joy that you felt in Paris. Yeah. And why don't you describe that? Because I think Paris is the first normal Olympics in quite a while. And when we were there, the Parisians were happy. The Parisians are never happy. And so the entire city was just lit with just the happiness. And also the community of athletes seemed to really find just a different rhythm or different vibe. Why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, so Paris was actually my first Paralympics. So it was a new experience for me, but I had made other teams. So I made the World Championship team and I went to Pan Ams. So for me, having a crowd full of 70,000 people was a completely new experience, because at Worlds it was a great experience, but there was definitely some empty stands in that situation. Yeah, so it was super full. So then you could definitely hear the crowd the entire time. We had a athlete who was from France, so they got a huge ovation when they came out. So but it was really special for me to have so many people there at the Paralympics just supporting all the athletes, because no matter what race you did, it was always full. And so that was a really special experience. And then for me, something that was really nice is just the variety of athletes that we were in the call tent. We were joking around, having fun, and I love just having that connection with the other athletes.
Yeah. Did you have anything you wanted to add? Not about Paris, but
no, but I mean that's what the Olympics are really all about, right? Is those stories that sometimes are not even captured. And the Olympics are supposed to be this place where, at least for a moment of time, all things are supposed to pause and people come together and they just cheer for these athletes who are competing. And they know, right? It's a pinnacle of all achievement for a reason, and it's so much history there. So that's really cool.
Yeah, Paris was one of the first that I think really fulfilled that mission for a long time. So questions from the audience? I can't see. So have someone in the front? Do we have microphones, right? Yes. Okay, why don't we get a microphone down here? You could just throw it. You'll never reach me, so it's going to hit someone in between me and whoever the person is in the back. We have someone down here.
You can say it and I can repeat it.
Yeah.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Okay. Hey, so I had a quick
I'm
question.
sorry. The first question was here. Go ahead and tell us, and then we'll repeat it. So the question was, how do you deal with the stress between warming up and the starting line?
So for me,
Good question.
So for me, there's it's about, let me think here. When I first, it's kind of like I get in that zone. So when I have my same ritual that I do every time before a race, and that for me calms me down. And in that situation, for me, it's just like tapping my body and just like activating my muscles and being like, I've done this so many times and this is another race, not changing anything just because of it being the Paralympics. So it's about just keeping everything consistent for every race that I do.
I think it's just, the same thing for me. I think the stress that we get comes from thinking about something that we can't control. So at least the way that I used to think about it is, I want to win this race or I want to do this thing, The warm-up is a part of the process. I know how to warm up properly. I have a routine. The routine is there, so it helps me get into a relaxed state, which helps me get into the prime, which is right before I go compete, be in the flow, where everything seems easy. And I think by removing thinking about the results, so I wrote about this, it's called, I focus on the process over the prize. So the prize is obviously really important. That's the target. We have to know where we're going. But if we disregard the process of getting there, then all of that is a moot point. It doesn't matter. So I focus all of my efforts on what are the things I need to do to make myself feel the best that I can of getting to the start line again. So I warm up, I cool down. We have usually about an hour before I go and compete. And in that hour, it's just the same. It's repetition. It's about positive affirmation. So I'm talking to myself. I'm reminding myself, I've done this before. I can do this again. This is muscle memory, and sometimes it's like, I'm confident, I'm strong, I'm relaxed. I would say these mantras. And the more that I would say them, the more that I would feel them, the more they would normally come into play when I would go and compete.
So, Apolo, were you in the flow before the race started? So, in other words, sustaining it for an hour would actually be hard. But was your mind in the flow and the body then followed into that? Was that the way that occurred?
I mean, my race routine was unique only because I would almost like shut down the day of the race. So I no longer communicated to anyone. I would try to conserve as much energy as possible. And this wasn't because I didn't want to get distracted. It's just because I just wanted to control every aspect that I could of being in the flow state. And so I became just very habitual and almost superstitious in the way that I would warm up to like the minute. And you just try to replicate everything because getting in and out of that flow is such a small, thimble.
Okay, there was a question in the back where we yanked the microphone out of the person's hand. Yeah.
Hello? Okay. So I have a question for you both. You both mentioned a lot about flow and process. And so I know for me, a student and also a content creator, there's a lot of times where there'll be tasks that are very monotonous and maybe not something I'm super deeply interested in. And I'll try to attain this flow state. I'll try to flow through it, but it can be difficult. And sometimes these monotonous periods of time last for days or weeks or months in order till we can achieve the final goal, right? So I was just wondering, some words of wisdom from both of you. Would appreciate it.
Sure. What type of content do you create?
So I do YouTube and podcast.
So I don't know specifically the challenges that you're having. I know that there's no Olympic athlete that is good at all the training that we do. And every Olympic athlete has probably at least one and probably two types of training that they despise. They hate it. They're not good at it. Mine was running, right? I hated running. Literally hated running. And I gotta tell you, over time, I became to accept running. I never really liked running. And I would just say this. I would say it's never gonna be perfect. You're never going to be in flow state in all the things that you do. And I don't think it's actually supposed to be like that. I think that you're not supposed to be in flow state in some of these areas so that in the other areas are so much more appreciative. You can't have sweet if you can't have salty, right? You can't have sour, same thing. So I think, I'm sure there's probably some hacks and stuff that will help you get through those things and facilitate those things better. And as you grow your channels and you can bring on more people, I'm sure that you can help offset some of that, de-risk some of that so you don't always have to deal with some of those. But there is a beauty that exists because of the friction. So don't turn away from that too much. Because the reason why is when I leaned into my friction, which was around nutrition and some of these other aspects of sport, when I really leaned in and I embraced them, that's when it cultivated the biggest amount of change. Is when I stopped telling myself that I just was not good at these things, and started changing the way that I communicated to myself. There's this great book called Psycho-Cybernetics, and it talks really around the way that we communicate to ourself. Be very, very weary because we are always listening subconsciously, whether we know it or not. And it's a very old book, and it's very outdated, but it does have the core principles of the types of vocabulary that you use, that you communicate to yourself around consistently. We all do this. We often will start to believe those things and they'll become reality. And we may not be exceptional at the specific task that you're relating to, but we can overcome and at least exponentially become better by leaning into some of those things. And that's my thought.
Yeah, and for me, I think it's how you approach whatever that task that you may not be great at, is that it's how your self-talk. So if you say that you really don't like whatever it is, then that is probably going to be how you think about it. So it's about changing your mindset to be like, this may be more difficult, but it's not something that I can't do. And through that, it will definitely help in being able to appreciate even the difficulties. Like for me, my weakness is my start. I know I'm not the best starter, but there's always ways that I can improve. Just thinking about little things, even if it's just one thing at a time, just adjusting to focus on that one thing will definitely help.
Okay.
One more thing. Sorry, I forgot. There's these, in sport, I think that if you can keep reminders, not in sport, but in life in general, if you can keep reminders of why you're doing the thing that you're doing, it really helps, right? Like sometimes when you're just doing something that you just feel like just sucks, you almost just want to give up. But when you constantly have this reminder about this goal, this promise, this thing, this dream that you have, it needs to be there always. The more that you have that, the less likely you are to back away from those things. And then, by the way, since you do YouTube and podcasts, there's amazing podcasts that exist around the psychology of both flow, grit. Angela Duckworth does her whole philosophical thesis on this out of Stanford. And she talks a lot about what happens here with when we lean into those moments when there's lots of friction, how that retrains our mind in the long term. And so for younger people and for older people. So there's a lot of value in doing the hard stuff continuously and with repetition because of what it does over long durations of time. It's actually really, really powerful.
Okay, Alvin? Both of you guys are stand up and speak up would be great.
So both of you are bicultural athletes. If you were given an opportunity to also compete for the other country that of your ethnic origin, would you consider it, and how would you think about that? That question.
Did you hear? You both heard the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So for me, me being both Korean and American, I actually have dual citizenship for both Korea and America. And for me, when I first started, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but the support that I got with being representing the U.S. was definitely impacted my decision. So I had Paris Spokane and just a lot of people who in the U.S. that were helping me along the way of how do I navigate the Paris side of things, and that impacted my ability to be like, yeah, I want to do U.S. versus Korea.
I don't think I ever thought about it. I grew up in my dad raised me, I would say, like very American, but with his Japanese influence. But it was very specific. Growing up, I think that I didn't really know or fully understand that I was half Japanese. I knew, but there wasn't a lot of kids in the school. There was no half Japanese kids on the team. And, I guess I felt like a little bit of an outsider, so to speak. Even in junior high, I remember, I would hang out with all the Asian kids. all the Korean kids in my school, Chinese kids, and then I hang out with all the white kids. And I never really knew kind of what I was or that this thing existed. And I think there's organizations all over the country that have done a great job of highlighting, I think, both the preservation of cultural heritage and sport. To me, I never even thought about it. I was born in the United States. I was born here. I was going to compete for the United States, but there was, and as I grew older, there was a deeper resounding pride, I think, that I had for both the grandparents, my father, his choices of coming to this country, the sacrifices that he made, and then also all of the teachings that my grandfather passed to him and my grandmother passed to us. So there are sports, that there are athletes, star athletes, that actually defect and they go and compete for another country. There was a very famous South Korean athlete who was exceptional in my sport, short track speed skating. His name was An Hyun-soo. And he defected and competed for Russia in the 2014 Sochi Olympics. And he changed his name to Victor An. And if you can imagine, the South Korean people were like, this is not okay. You do not do this. And there was a lot of other political reasons of why he was doing this inside of speed skating. He was kind of being blocked from joining the team and such. And, I remember thinking to myself, and I have friends too who competed for the US at one point, and then they no longer could compete in the US because it became too competitive, and now they're competing for another country. So I think that I don't think I would. I think I would try to do that here. But I say that with full bias because I made my teams, right? So I was never on that cusp. But it's an interesting question. Yeah.
So I've been told to wrap it up, which means, of course, I'll ignore that and take one more question if there's one more question. Okay, I think you here in the front was the last one I saw. Can we get mics down here?
Okay, so earlier you talked about wanting to help with mental health.
Oh, wait a second. Sorry. It was this woman here in the front. That's the last question. Sorry. Okay, because you're talking about a topic I care about, then you'll get the last question. Anyway, please go ahead.
So my question is, what is your most recent biohacking technique that you have incorporated into your life?
Okay, question was, what's the most recent biohacking technique, i.e. cyborg implant, that you've incorporated into your training in your life? Briefly.
Why don't you go first? I feel like existing competitive athletes don't incorporate too much stuff because in fear of drug testing. I don't think things have changed in terms of the psychology around that much, but
we definitely limit how much stuff we put in our bodies, for sure. Like, we get drug tested during competitions and outside of competitions. So it's all about making sure everything is above the books, if you will, and just focusing on keeping everything super simple, honestly. And so doing the same thing over and over again. It's all about repetition and not letting other things, or whether that's, and that can just not just be stuff you put in your body, but also outside noise, like social media, for example, would be an example of just keeping everything in one direction and not letting what might be happening over there, whether that's another competitor or a something you saw on the internet. Just keeping everything the same.
Okay. Okay, the question, you had a question? Okay, last question. I promise. Margaret, wherever Margaret is, I promise. Last question.
So earlier you were talking about mental health, and I want to ask what your advice would be to young athletes with autism, like Asperger's or schizophrenia, who will have more trouble than normal with socializing, like being on a large team or in a large crowd, and who might be more likely to have a nervous breakdown, what your advice to them would be.
Yeah, Paul, you've done work with Special Olympics, in addition to a number of other organizations on that.
Yeah, I have done some work. I'm obviously not a clinician. I'm not a doctor, but I think sports has a place for everyone, first and foremost. And I think that the lessons learned whether someone has a specific challenge that makes it socially challenging for that particular person in those environments, I think people make it work, and the Special Olympics specifically is designed around inclusivity, regardless of the challenge that participant is wanting to play sports through. So, on a personal level, I've learned so much. I thought that giving was all about me giving my time to these organizations. And what I quickly realized was the abundance of lessons and reminders that these amazing athletes would teach me about purity, about dedication, about love, about play, about all these things that we sometimes forget about because I take so many things for granted in my own personal life. So I think it's a great question. The world is very imperfect, and there's lots of challenges that people have. And some of those things I don't have. And so I can't see through the same lens as some of those people. But it is my belief that sport is open for anyone and everyone, regardless of skill level, regardless of talent. It is there because people and human beings are supposed to be able to play in some capacity.
Yeah, so me being a para-athlete, I can definitely relate to some degree. It's about just trying it, just not being afraid to fail, just willing to take chances and seeing where you fit in, and not just that, but just willing to just enjoy the process and kind of not letting your circumstance impact what you think you're capable of. There's a lot of things that you might not even be thinking about that might actually kind of open your eyes, not just in sports, but in life. From just gaining confidence through sports. It's kind of like what happened with me, is that I wasn't good in school, but through sports I was able to gain that confidence that helped me do well in school. So it's about sports can be just like life skills that might help in all phases of life.
With that, at the risk of being severely criticized for months to come, this was really special. And, it's wonderful to have, in our family, so we have the U.S. Olympic support, we have the Asian Society support, and we have the SAM support. And to bring all these three together tonight and have both of you here is a delight. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.